Our next speakers are Karen Goldflag, Z'aana Burstein, and Kalmit Altman from here at Bar-Ilan University, talking about multilingualism and multiculturalism on campus. Bevakasha.
Good afternoon, or not yet, nearly. If you talk to a man in a language he understands, that goes to his head. Thank you. If you talk to him in his own language, that goes to his heart. Does anyone know whose quote this is? Excellent. Okay. Thank you. Okay, so this is Nelson Mandela's quote, and I think it relates very nicely to what we just heard about the Israeli Hope Project, because I think the rationale behind this project is that we create an environment that respects diversity and develops a sensitivity to other cultures by having workshops for lecturers, by having workshops for administrative staff, and joint activities for students. Once you have these activities and you make people more sensitive, right, the individuals within this framework can feel a sense of belonging. If you show an understanding of others' language and culture, they feel a sense of connection to you. I remember an incident that happened to me 28 years ago. I was waiting in line for a tour of the White House. This was way before 9/11. It wasn't that difficult. Now I think you need a checkup half a year ahead of time. And I was standing in line with two of my Israeli friends. And we were very excited to see that one of the 7 languages that were listed and giving the do's and don'ts, all the rules of what you're supposed to do and what you're not allowed to do when you go on the tour, one of the 7 languages was in Hebrew. And that was very surprising for us. Out of all the languages in the world, one of the 7 is Hebrew? And just seeing those Israeli Hebrew letters made us very proud, until we saw a few people ahead of us in line, someone holding a dog. And I said to one of my friends in Hebrew, can you believe it? He didn't read the signs. He didn't read the instructions. You're not allowed to take pets into the White House. What do you think happened next? And answered me in? Hebrew. Obviously, in Hebrew. So the Israeli chutzpah was already famous back then. The example, I think, demonstrates two aspects. First, if you talk to a person in his own language, it goes to his heart, as Mandela says. Even if he has a good comprehension of the other language, it doesn't have the same emotional effect as his home language or native language. And that's why we felt so proud in the beginning. The second, it doesn't work. The second point is that language and culture do not always have a direct correlation. This is the reason I think we have, obviously, we put it in our title. It's not just multilingualism, it's multiculturalism as well. And I personally try to stay away from the rude aspect that characterizes my Israeli culture, even if my home language is Hebrew and it's the language I feel most comfortable in. In this talk, we will report on research that resulted from shared kind of teamwork of the interdisciplinary group that received funding from the rector's office. As we heard from Sharon earlier today. This is the second year that the rector is funding joint interdisciplinary projects for researchers that have similar interests, but have different research backgrounds. Our group, for example, is made up of researchers from different departments. We have representatives from the School of Education, the Hebrew Linguistics Department, the Brain Science Faculty, the Department of Criminology, the English Literature and Linguistics Department, and the English as a Foreign Language Unit. When we first started meeting, we thought we would share our research with our colleagues and receive feedback from them. At some point quite early on, We also wanted this group to come up with a shared project. So we decided to check students' awareness of multilingualism and multiculturalism on campus, because obviously this is something we all share. I think it's also important to point out that in addition to our diverse research backgrounds, the group consisted, and here we are, the group consisted of people from different cultural and linguistic backgrounds. It was a fascinating process, and we're very fortunate to have this kind of experience and get holistic feedback from each and every one of the people that you see on the screen. Before we continue, I would like to thank our wonderful group, Professor Sharon Armon-Lotem, Professor Joel Walters, Professor Elinor Seik-Haddad, Professor Susan Rothstein, Professor Nira Mashal, Professor Malka Muchnik, Professor Esther Adiyafa, Dr. Lior Lax, Dr. Michal Ben Shachar, and Dr. Rotem Leshem. Thank you so much, and I see some of you here. Thank you. University campuses provide a wealth of opportunities for multilingual and multicultural experiences and interactions. Yet, despite this wide potential, the typical pattern of social contact on campus does not go beyond the minimal interaction between students from different cultural and linguistic backgrounds. The goals of this study were threefold. First, to examine students' awareness of multilingual and multiculturalism in Israel, to see what they know, how much they're aware of here. The second goal is to examine students' multilingual and multicultural awareness and attitude on campus and in the classroom. And the third goal is to examine students' perception of their social, cultural, and linguistic identity. A closer look at the research goals, we show that we focused on three levels of awareness: the self, the larger context of the campus, and the larger scope of looking at the situation in Israel as a whole. This structure of going from the narrowest to the more general environment reminds us of Yuri Bronfenbrenner's, I hope I pronounced it correctly, ecological systems theory. The theory stresses the importance of studying a child in the context of multiple environments, from the most intimate home ecological system, moving outward to the larger school system and the most expansive system, which is society and culture. Each of these systems inevitably interact with one another and influence each other in every aspect of the child's life. And we also have development throughout life, the Chronos system. If we go back to our research goals again, we can equate each of these levels of awareness to the terms that Bronfenbrenner brought up. The self would be the individual, the campus life would be the microsystem, and the national context is the macrosystem. On the level of the macrosystem, there are multiple languages spoken in Israel. I'm going to quiz you on what Sharon said. How many of you remember how many languages are spoken in Israel?
50.
Okay, thank you. An excellent student. And you can see here on the screen some of these languages and statistics from the Central Bureau of Statistics here in Israel. How many people speak the following languages? Here are some more of these languages. And some more. All of these are spoken by more than 5,000 people at least, and we will come back to this. There are more. I only showed around 30, but there are more languages. And this will somehow connect to the results that we found with students' awareness. So remember these statistics. On the level of the campus, we also have a wide diversity of cultures and languages. This picture, for example, demonstrates graduate students from a specific department here at Bar-Ilan. Just by looking at this picture, you can see that there are people from different cultural, ethnic, and religious backgrounds. In fact, out of 17,000 students that study at Bar-Ilan. 520 are national students coming from the US, Italy, Germany, China, India, France, Canada, Korea, Brazil, South Africa, Belgium, and more. We have 1,350 students that are Arabic speakers. Most of them are Muslims, but we also have quite a few Christians, Druze, Bedouins. Bedouins are also Muslims, but just to show you the diversity within the Arabic speaking community. 150 students are new immigrants from France, and we also have ultra-Orthodox students. Bar-Ilan opens its doors to the ultra-Orthodox Jewish community, requiring special classes for men and women. These students study separately, and right now we only have 200 students, but Bar-Ilan is hoping that this number will increase in the near future. We're pointing out these statistics as well because you'll see that students are not that aware of what's going on here on campus. We're now going to hear from Dr. Z'aana Burstein regarding the methodology of the research, and then we'll hear some preliminary results from Dr. Kamit Alman. Very preliminary results. Thank you.
We'll go over the methodology that we used to tackle all these different issues that Karen has mentioned. And if we see the word methodology on the screen, we will be able to start.
Now it's working.
Here. Okay. Yeah. So I'm going back to the three-level pyramid that was just presented by Karen. We are talking about three different levels. We start with the core of the system, which is me, myself, and we go on how I see myself on campus, where I study, and we get to the national context, where I am a member of Israeli society. And I'm going back to the research goals to see how they match our pyramid. So we want to examine students' awareness of multilingualism and multiculturalism in Israeli society, and that's our national context. And here, basically, some kind of global issue that we're interested in is how well am I aware of languages and cultures existing in Israel, because this is the society I live in and I belong to. In terms of our second goal, we want to examine students' multicultural and multilingual awareness on campus and in the classroom. So we're narrowing it down further from the campus to the classroom. And here we are globally interested in some kind of perception of, am I aware of who other people are? And do others see me as what I am in terms of culture and language? And here I'm getting to myself, that's the core of the system. We want to examine students' perception of their own identity, and we figured out it's not the easiest part of this whole labyrinth. It's maybe the hardest. We have three dimensions from three perspectives from which we want to assess each student's identity, social, cultural, and linguistic. And here the question is, who are you? Who am I? And I'm going on with the methodology. Of course, the way to approach this question or a set of questions is to, first of all, construct some kind of a questionnaire, which we did. We did it in the framework of our interdisciplinary group, and it has gone through a series of stages. The first stage, of course, was construction. We constructed the questionnaire, and we approved it by discussing it with members of our interdisciplinary group. It took quite a few sessions to come to a certain kind of agreement on different issues. The moment we were more or less satisfied, it went to the ethics committee, and we did some piloting before we reached the stage of administration. I'm going to address here a few of the methodological considerations. Each of these considerations will be approached from three perspectives: what our intention was, what we actually want to achieve here by asking specific questions on the questionnaire, what dilemmas we confronted, and that's exactly what was brought up at our meetings with the interdisciplinary group, and the final version. I'll present the final version regarding each of these aspects we're focusing on. So the first methodological consideration is about the procedure of administrating our questionnaire. Our intention was to obtain a large sample, obviously, as large as possible, of Bar-Ilan students from a variety of departments, and obviously we want to run some statistics, so we need a large sample. Our dilemmas were multifold. First of all, we definitely want an anonymous questionnaire. However, we're interested in some specific course names or at least course numbers, so we could identify what matter, what subject matter, what language matter is involved in specific courses. We also would like people to fill out the questionnaire at home. However, we are not sure about the response rate, so we thought a more sure way would be to administrate in the classroom. However, in the classroom, we're going to take some valuable time from the lecture. Another dilemma was, even though we want a high response rate, whether we should do it on paper or online. Why not take advantage of the recent technological advances that we have at our possession? We thought maybe that hard copies filled out by students would produce a more reliable set of data. However, online resources were the option we strive for. Of course, you never know when students are sitting with their tablets, computers, laptops, and phones in class, whether they're doing what we're asking them to do or playing computer games or maybe engaging in some other exciting tasks. But we hoped that with the instructor's request and encouragement, we will get a large sample from students. And we also wanted it to keep it short, even though we needed a sufficient amount of items that we could focus on later in our analysis. So our final version, no course information. We debated it, and that's our decision. We opted for an online questionnaire to be completed by students on their phones, laptops, computers in class with the instructor present. We came up with 33 items, which was probably okay for a 10-15 minutes activity. And we committed ourselves to 15 minutes so instructors could carry on with their classes. And participation was optional but encouraged by the instructor, which provided for a high response rate, hopefully. So this is the page, the title, the first page of our questionnaire, the online survey in English, in Hebrew, and whatever languages I will talk about. This is another page just from the body of the text. Second methodological consideration I would like to address is the background information we would like to have about our students. The intention was to obtain, obviously, a sufficient amount of background information about our participants. And our dilemma was, of course, the length of the questionnaire. The more we want to know, the longer the questionnaire becomes. This is not feasible. So our final version includes some of the issues that were absolutely necessary for us. And of course, the name of the department or department students belong to, the degree, BA, MA, PhD, diploma, students' age, and we have students as young as 15 to 19 years old who are at the same time high school students, so we needed to consider a range of ages, gender, place of residence. We now are getting to more culture and language-oriented issues, the country of origin and the age of immigration. And now here, definitely, these items point more towards cultural and linguistic belonging, identification, which is the place of attending high school. Probably that language would be the strongest, depending on the place where a person attended high school. Years in Hebrew-speaking educational system in Israel, we have some kind of evaluation or assessment of approximate, of course, of how good their Hebrew is, native language, as opposed to preferred language, because we have people who are bilingual and trilingual, also multilinguals, and they sometimes do not talk in the language of their home. We have other languages spoken, considered, of course. We have some information about family status, spouses, because in this regard I would like to say that it could be a very interesting factor whether a person is married or not, and whether the spouse speaks the same language or a different language could be an indication of later maybe of awareness a person has towards different languages and perceptions towards different languages, because communication at home is conducted in 2 different languages or even 3. Hopefully there is communication. Children are also a very important aspect of this in multilingual communication. If your child speaks the same language as you do, that's one option, but sometimes children speak a language none of the parents speak, because a parent is an immigrant from Spain, another parent is an immigrant from an English-speaking country, and the child attends school or a kindergarten in Israel in Hebrew. That could be a very interesting combination. We are now moving on with the language choice. We wanted to conduct our questionnaire in a range of languages. These are the 7 languages we came up with. And of course, language choice could be another interesting aspect, another interesting variable, because the fact that the person chooses a questionnaire in a specific language can indicate something about his language choice, his identity, his preferences. However, we faced a couple of dilemmas here, of course. What about other languages? Why only these 7? We have more people on campus. We have speakers of languages which are represented by several individuals, but still they would like to make this choice. We also know, of course, it's a research-based finding, that one's preference for language and one's identity, linguistic identity, sometimes goes against one's literacy skills, and then a person who would like to fill out a questionnaire in Russian may not be able to do so because he's not literate in Russian to such an extent. So the final version is we came up with 3 languages, Hebrew and Arabic, the official languages, and English is a language of international communication, which should be known by most of the immigrants. These are the 3 questionnaires in Hebrew, Arabic, and English. And we're moving on with the issue of terminology. We wanted to use words, lexical items, terms that would be clear and understandable our students. So we strived for unambiguous phrasing within the language, and then we had translation issues because we had 3 languages now across languages. Of course, there are multiple dilemmas involved in translating, managing the phrasing and translation issues. We tried to deal with them. I'm just giving you an example. The question about awareness on campus was, the intention was, do you see me, who I am, culturally and linguistically? So we first phrased it as, עד כמה רואים את התרבות שלי או שפה שלי בקמפוס. In English it is rendered as, to what extent is your culture seen on campus? So we looked at the word see. And then we changed it at כמה התרבות שלך מיוצגת בקמפוס, and we changed it to represented accordingly. And then Professor Malka Muchnik came up with a wonderful option that we used, עד כמה יש נראות לתרבות או שפה שלי בקמפוס, and we translated it as visible, visibility. And I guess this was our final option, final version. Another ethical consideration, we had an intention of including, as I said, a course number or a course name for all kinds of interesting findings later. We have a choice between asking, to what extent is your instructor aware of different languages in the classroom, or to what extent the instructors in your courses are aware of different languages. Another question, to what extent does the instructor adjust his teaching to different languages and cultures in the classroom? And to what extent do the instructors in various courses adjust their teaching? And here, of course, the debate is between the instructor in the course and instructors in various courses. And in this case, we have an ethical issue here because a student filling out a certain questionnaire in a certain classroom would refer to the instructor in that course, and we do not want that person to be judged by students. That's why our final version definitely unavoidably was To what extent do the instructors in various courses adjust? We sacrifice some of interesting variables, but for ethical considerations, that's what was decided to do. And the most interesting issue probably methodologically is how to tackle this question, who are you, who am I? And we wanted to elicit students' responses in that respect. Of course, many people could come up with multiple identifications because there are different options to determine who you are. So our dilemmas were, how do we obtain this information? We had three options, three choices. We could ask it in an open-ended question, like who are you? We could provide different choices and give all kinds of different options. And we could provide an example and expect students to follow that example. Now, there are issues regarding each of these three choices. I would like to share with you some of the experience we had with the open-ended question in our BMBF project on parent and child identity a few years ago. We asked it as an open question. The question was asked of both parents and children, young children, preschool children. Some of the children responses were, the first one was very interesting, Ivriya, which comes from a blended version of Ivrit, Hebrew, and a person speaking a language. Probably it was coined based on some kind of association with other languages which do not work for Hebrew. It's a non-word in Hebrew. Rusit, Russian, Rusiya, Arabic, Arabia, Spanish is Faradit, Faradia. So we had a wonderful, cute term of Ivriya. We also had responses like, I'm a Barca fan and I'm a child. So these were not considered options for our linguistic and cultural analysis. Parents were no better. They were worse. They said that my child is a leader, my child is talented, my child is lively, my child is whatever you would like to say about your child. And one parent said, my child is a London aristocrat. That's what we call him, a Russian parent. But this is kind of label that parent came up with, and this is not what we intended to have. We now exploited another option, which was from a list, okay? We have a list of different things. A similar approach was used by Susie Yoffe in her PhD. But when we started constructing the list, we saw it's a never-ending list. There are so many options we could not manage possibly. It's not feasible to come up with all the possible variants. So we came back to our final product, and our final product was, and it's not here for some reason, how would you define yourself, your identity, in terms of national, cultural, and linguistic aspects. And that was the final product. And now we will see what happened with after all these debates and considerations with our results.
Okay, so let's start with the results. So, which kind of students answered these questionnaires? 312 students answered the questionnaires. 267 chose the Hebrew version, 26 chose the Arabic version, and 19 chose the English version. Out of them, you see that most of them are BA students. In terms of gender, we have 80% female, and in terms of age, 70% of the students are aged 20 to 29, just so we understand who is answering this. In terms of the departments, where do they come from? So 68% come from social sciences, and the rest are scattered throughout humanities, exact sciences, engineering, but the bulk is from social sciences. If we go back to our research questions and we want to address the national context, namely how aware are you in terms of the multilingual society here in Israel, what we basically asked is how many languages are spoken by more than 5,000 speakers in Israel? And these are the results we got. I'm just going to remind you that we talked about around 50 languages in Israel. So 35% of our participants said 2 to 4 languages. okay? So that means that if they look across the room or they look at themselves, if they're bilingual, they just mention those languages. 31% talked about 5 to 8 languages. 19% talked about 9 to 15, and 15% talked about 16 plus languages, where in reality we're talking about 50 languages. In terms of the campus, okay, so we go down one level. We wanted to find out, first of all, the languages spoken on campus, the native languages of the participants, and you see that 72% of the participants spoke Hebrew. There are 9 different languages that the participants spoke and 9 different combinations. Namely, people said Hebrew and English or Arabic and English and different combinations for that. I want to remind you Karen's slide talking about what happens in Bar-Ilan here, and you see the rubric for Russian, Romanian, English, Ukrainian, and Hungarian, and probably other languages is unknown. We hope that once we send this out to a bigger sample, we may be able to answer this unknown. In terms of if we're still on campus and we want to find out in terms of the actual classroom, how appropriate it is for a lecturer to speak in a different language. So we decided to have a gradual kind of scale. So we first asked, how appropriate is it for the lecturer to present a few words in a different language? 1 represents very inappropriate, 5 represents very appropriate. So you see that only a few chose that it's very inappropriate, and most of the students understood that it's appropriate to have a few words in another language. When we talk about a few sentences, we see a gradual phase here where a bit more think, 1, that it's very inappropriate, and we see the distribution across the other 2 to 5. When we talk about a full slide in another language, so you see that the students don't really like this and say that they consider this very inappropriate. Most of them chose this. And look at this slide. When we said a full presentation in another language, that's a no-no. Very inappropriate for them to have a presentation in a different language. So as lecturers, we have to understand these conclusions and try to see what we can do about them. So we tried to say, okay, so this is what they think. So maybe their ratings have to somehow do with their, we basically asked which factors relate between what they actually score on these 4 slides and their tolerance. Then we said bilinguals, they should be more tolerant to other languages. Well, no, that's not what we found, okay? And then we looked even deeper to what Z'aana and Karen mentioned about the spouses to participants who speak different languages or children of participants who speak different languages, and then we said, they're going to be more tolerant. So the one with the children didn't work, but the one with the spouses did. So we see that participants who had spouses who spoke different languages were more tolerant to students speaking among themselves in the classroom in a different language. So maybe you can't change it, but maybe being married to someone who speaks a different language can make you a bit more tolerant. We go back to the self, okay? So we said national context, the students don't really know how many languages are spoken in Israel. The campus, they're less tolerant in a way. And so what happens with the self? Who are you? So in terms of who are you, part of who are you is the preferred language. What do you prefer to speak? Your native language may be X, but you may prefer to speak another language. So all in all, the blue represents Hebrew, and you see that in both cases, Hebrew is the majority. But what we were interested in is, are there languages presented as a home language, an L1, a mother tongue, a native language, whatever you may call it, but are not represented when we ask the person, what do you prefer to speak? And this is what we found. So whoever chose Amharic as their mother tongue native language L1, it disappeared when it came to the preferred language because they preferred to speak in Hebrew. When somebody said that their native language is Russian or any combinations of Russian and Hebrew, what they actually preferred at the end is either Russian or Hebrew. Okay. When it came to Arabic speakers, whoever chose Arabic as their home language, finally, when we looked at their preferred, most of them still preferred Arabic, but we also got nice combinations of English and Arabic and Hebrew. Okay, now we turn to the most challenging, interesting part. Who are you? So we asked, define your social, cultural, linguistic identity. So there were some, and we gave 3 lines. There were some who just used one word in labeling themselves, and they said, multicultural, Jewish, Arab, Sabra, Israeli. 50% of the people, of the 27%, chose Israeli as one label which represents them in a single word. That means social, cultural, linguistic is Israeli. What? No, we left it as an open-ended question because we wanted to see what people actually thought who they were.
The question is whether people understand the phrase social.
So this took us around 4 months to just to think of this question.
Yeah, I remember.
And we piloted in different classes with different students, and I see representatives here of my seminar in multiculturalism and multilingualism, which really helped me in trying to understand what we want and what they understand and how we can kind of bridge. We talked about bridges today. So one single label, 27% of the people chose to identify themselves as this. We got a kind of multiple identities, namely a phrase, where people said something like, I'm a social cultural bilingual, or I'm a liberal religious person, or I am a person, Jewish and Israeli, or I'm secular, atheist, Israeli Jew. Okay? So these are some, so you understand that who are you is difficult. Okay? But, so we have the one word stage, we have a phrase, and now, are you ready for this? Who are you? Remember we gave them 3 lines, but this is what they wrote. So I'm an American-born religious Zionist Jew with roots that lead back to Yemen and Poland. I live off my Savta's Yemenite soup and my mother-in-law's gefilte fish. I appreciate the American hot dog and the Israeli shawarma, which is Greek or Turkish. I'm proud to be an American when it comes to my education in manners and respect to others. I see value in my Israeli New Yorker aggressiveness and tachlis. I'm proud to be the grandson of a woman who flew to Israel on the magic carpet. I'm proud to be the sole male descendant of a huge family that disappeared during the Holocaust. I like my American baseball and basketball team. I'm proud to have served my country and risked my life in Operation Protective Edge. I'm proud to be a part of the people of Israel in the land of Israel by the Torah and values of Israel. And I will pass all of these aspects of culture to my children. I will teach them not to be ashamed of these things, yet show them that they have the right to adopt whatever they are happy with, as long as it is not because of exterior pressure. Okay, so now you understand what we face when we talk about who are you? So one word, phrase, scroll. Okay, so then we asked them for their social, cultural, and linguistic. So let's try to make a bit of seder, a bit of organization here. So we started with linguistic because it was the easiest. So linguistic is someone who speaks one language and you see the rest. I especially like a Hebrew speaker with a desire to learn other languages. Or I'm interested that the discourse in media and all information in Israel will be conducted only in Hebrew. You have an English monolingual, an Arabic speaker, Hebrew, likes and prefers Hebrew, a language lover. Okay, so this was relatively easy to come by. But then we started with the social, and we didn't know what to do with all the factors, but there's a small mistake here, but social, we thought of the social role one has in society. So people said a feminist socialist, a human being, a mother, a family man, single and young. I put here secular, but you'll soon see this in the cultural side. Okay, so this is social role. Okay, and here we come to cultural. So cultural wasn't easy because we basically understood that when we said cultural, it's cultural, but it's also religious, and it's also ethnicity, and it's many other things that are related here. So we have Israeli, but we also have Ashkenazi, we have Arab Muslim. What?
What's the exact question?
Define yourself in terms of your the order is important here because this we also had deliberations on. Social, cultural, linguistic. Okay? So, as you see, Israeli, Canadian, European, we also had someone say belonging to the Romanian culture. Okay, so this is culture. How do we put all these things together and what can we understand from them? So despite the image of Israel being a multilingual and multicultural state, and despite the many languages spoken on campus, we see that university students are less aware of how many languages are spoken in Israel. 12% thought that it's 2, okay? And 35% thought that it's up to 4. So we really have to do some work in terms of getting our students to know how many languages are spoken. In terms of, once again, despite what we know about Israel being multilingual and multicultural, university students don't have much tolerance to other languages spoken on campus by the lecturer, besides the few words inserted. In terms of identity, you get a very complex picture of identity where participants present themselves with multiple identities, but these are not necessarily multicultural identities. So this is something we have to think about. Getting people's awareness of multilingual and multicultural in terms of their multicultural and multilingual identity, we thought that it feeds itself. So if you know who you are, who the people are in Israel, and you know what happens in your university and you're tolerant to it, it can help you in defining your own identity, but it can also go the other way around. So if you know who you are, you might be more aware of what's happening on campus and be more tolerant to it, and then finally find out more on a national context. So it basically feeds itself. I see my students here. Who are you is a question I begin with every seminar on multiculturalism and multilingualism. And one of my students, after I asked that last week again to see what happens in terms of their process, they said, since you asked this question, we started thinking of who we are. And now we have a more basic understanding of who we are. But in terms of this questionnaire, some of the students came up to us and said, we never thought about who we are. And some of them wrote, this is an unclear question. We don't know the answer to it. So it's about time we understand who we are, and maybe just by administrating this questionnaire, we'll find out more about who we are, what's happening on campus, what's happening in Israel. So thank you to this great interdisciplinary forum, which was much more than as Sharon pointed out, in terms of just changing thoughts. I wanted to thank Susie Jaffe, which helped us a lot with the online questionnaire, our participants, of course, And I also want to thank Naila, who helped us with the adaptation and translation of the Arabic questionnaire, and to all of you for listening about who we are.
Why don't you step and invite the other speakers up? We have time for questions and discussion of the entire morning's presentations.
Yes.
I think we discussed it also in our group about what is the language that should be preferred. So from
Should be?
time-
Should be preferred?
I mean, what is the language of science? So from time to time, we do have slides in English, each and every one of us, I believe, to a different extent in the different courses, etc. However, I think that there should be a clear message to the students that at current, in science, the language of science is English. It once was German, now it's English. It could be, we don't know what it would be in the future, but I think that they have to acknowledge that this is the language of science, although of course we provide translations in the exam and during the lessons, and we do both languages, but I think this should, be emphasized.
But the fact that the students rated the way they did means that the expectations are not clear. So it works both ways. I think it's very smart that we see the results, and now as a lecturer, I become more sensitive to my students. But I should also tell my students that it's part of my expectation for their academic building and construction that they should be aware that I will present in this and this language, and it's part of their education. And then it might, by talking about it, we might reach.
And also, it's not clear if you have a difference between MA and BA students.
Right. So most were BA, of course. So we represent the BA. But as you know, we just started. Yeah.
Thank you. That's very interesting. But you didn't ask about English. You asked about another language.
Yes.
And to me, there's a big difference between English and other languages, because there is an expectation that the students should have some knowledge of English.
Excellent question.
But if I
No, it's an excellent question. We thought about it and we asked about it, but I didn't present the results. And we saw the overall same picture. Okay, in terms, but the other way around, like in terms of Hebrew inserted into English classrooms as opposed to English inserted into Hebrew classrooms.
You asked about Hebrew inserted into
We said if the lesson is conducted in a language other than English, other than Hebrew, how appropriate is it to insert Hebrew into the?
And they said not.
And they said it's a mirror view of what we got from the Hebrew results.
The more Hebrew, the better.
The more Hebrew, no, depending if it's a few words, a few slides, a whole presentation, it's also gradual.
A few words is okay.
A few words is okay, but if it's a whole presentation, it's not.
So it's the same.
It's the same results.
It's not a mirror.
Right, it's the same results.
I wonder what the lecturer thinks. What the lecturers think.
What do you think, lecturers?
Because I wonder whether the students' response are, subconsciously influenced by what the lecturers convey.
So the second step, of course, this is something we thought about, is to send the same or a mirror version of it to the lecturers to see what happens. Okay, we started talking about this questionnaire in October. Okay?
Amazing.
So, and it's all thanks to this great interdisciplinary forum.
Carmen?
Yeah, Suzy.
We were just wondering, besides the English department, which classes did you target where the language of instruction is not Hebrew?
So we thought of French, but we weren't sure, and we didn't see that we got results from there yet. But this is 300 participants.
Right.
We hope to get to much more, and then maybe I'll be able to answer this question.
I was just wondering, if I know correctly, I'm not sure I'm right about this, but Yiddish and Latino are actually
No. Arabic and Hebrew are the official languages. What? They have a special status as a language.
Sure, but that's the English is recognized to the extent that it is. Was that actually represented in any?
No. Somebody could have said that this is what they speak, but we didn't.
You didn't have special questions about it?
No.
Do you know of similar surveys done in other universities in Israel?
When we came up with the literature review, so we had the results and then we worked back. And then we said, okay, so let's look at what we have in the literature to try. And we didn't find, based on the search we did in the last month or so, such like extensive where they talk about the state, the campus, and who you are. The campus.
That is missing from most research because national and personal levels have been covered, but to establish this kind of gradual system, probably we are not aware of it. But
We have research on the individual level and we have research on the state level, but the campus was missing.
Do you expect that there might be differences among universities, or you think?
We would really like to know, and I was asked already by several colleges and universities when we intend to, and we said we'll start with Bar-Ilan, and then we'll understand, and then we'll grow.
I was wondering if, how I can get my campus.
You see?
Because one of the things we were discussing is as a campus of education where self-awareness should be a little bit more, emphasis on the should. So.
We have many students here from education. Most of them, we got most of them to answer. And we thought they would be more aware, but they're not as aware as we would want them to be. So we have work.
If the two official languages of Israel are Hebrew and Arabic, I was surprised by the percentage of Arabic speakers at the school when you mentioned it. It's relatively low compared to the college I know best, the Hadassah Academic College in Jerusalem, where it's more like 25%, 30% of the students are Arabic speakers. How did your Arabic, presumably someone who chooses to come to Bar-Ilan is making some assumptions about the languages that the classes will be in. Can you talk about how the Arabic speakers responded on this questionnaire?
Can I answer? Because I had it in class. First of all, Bar-Ilan is second in the country in the number of, as a university, the number of Arab students. It's second after Haifa, which is higher, of course, because of the Arab population. And they were very happy to see Arabic in the questionnaire because it's lacking in class, of course. We do from time to time speak about the Arab culture. Now it's Ramadan, so we speak about it in class, but it's lacking from the blackboard or from in general. So they were basically very happy to see the questionnaire and people being thinking about Arab students.
And I can talk about my experience in my class in the English Literature and Linguistics department. So here we have people who are either studying to be teachers of English or already teachers of English coming to us as graduate students. And there was this, again, Hebrew, Arabic, and English. And surprising, to my big surprise, quite a few of them did not choose to answer it in Arabic. They were happy to see the Arabic, but then they chose to answer in English or in Hebrew. The majority, actually, since it's English, they chose to answer in English rather than in Arabic. And I must tell you that the ones who answered it in Arabic took the longest. They actually had to try and read it in Arabic, and apparently it took them longer than doing it in Hebrew or English. The last point I want to mention is that they were highly active discussing the questions as they were answering them among themselves, which was amazing. And I thought, wow, we should probably give more attention to it.
You mean everyone was, or do you mean the Arabic-speaking students in particular were interacting with each other?
I can see the corner of the class where some of them were sitting, and there was this very active. What do we say?
Yeah, to follow up on what Z'aana was saying, so this is just basic analysis, like initial analysis of the data. So
Eventually
Preliminary.
we have this broken down by native language, by preferred language, and by all the other parameters that we have here. And as to your question, Esti, through the Open Academia, Tikvah Academia, which Leat Letzer has introduced today. So we are meeting with the director next week to try and understand from the director as to how we can implement and how we can introduce Arabic into the Bar-Ilan campus more strongly. So we are very hopeful that through the Va'ada L'Kshirut Tarbutit, which I'm a member of, we will succeed into making the landscape of Bar-Ilan, the landscape of the campus more multilingual and multicultural. I'm hopeful.
I think you should know about these results before you sit with her.
Yes.
And we'll send her.
Wow.
What an interesting discussion this morning. Thank you all for your presentations, for your questions.